time and contributing to this series. We appreciate your time and interest. Harro van Lente studied at the University of Ghent and graduated in Physics and Philosophy of Science and Technology. He has been research manager at the Inspire Foundation, a think tank of the KPMG consulting firm. During 15 years, he taught innovation studies at Utrecht University. He has also been program director of technology assessment at Nanonext Netherlands, the Dutch Nanotechnology Consortium, and was visiting professor at the University of California in Santa Barbara. Currently, he is a full professor of science and technology studies at the Faculty of Arts and Social Science in Maastricht University. He is one of the founding fathers of the Sociology of Expectations, which studies how representations of the future how the representation of the future shape current socio-technical developments. But since it is the topic of today, Harro will explain this further. He has also published more than 140 journal articles, book chapters, and edited volumes on technical dynamics, innovations, policy, and knowledge production. He is recipient of the 2018 East Freeman Award with the book Emerging Technologies for Diagnostic Alzheimer's Disease, Innovating with Care, co-edited with Marine Bohemic and Ellen Moores. His current research interests concern how emerging technologies, such as in smart industry or space tourism, produce novelty and needs. After the presentation, we will have the opportunity for a round of Q&A questions. There is a link we will share right now with you in the chat, and you can write the questions during the presentation or after it. And in this link, you can also see all the questions posed, and the one that received more links will be the one who will be asked first. And now I give the floor to Harro van Lente. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paula, for these kind words. And I can also now start to share some slides. And so this is, yeah, I guess this is all visible for you. And I can introduce you to this topic of sociology of expectations and sustainable transitions. And thanks again for the invitation. And I will do the following in this webinar. So I will first give a sort of basic ingredients of the sociology of expectations. I will tell you a bit about the overall dynamics that these expectations result in, and then reflect a bit on terms and concepts, because there are quite some terms that are quite similar. And I will focus a bit on developments within the sociology of expectations, but then also in the end conclude with how these two traditions of sociology of expectations and sustainability transitions meet or clash, or well, we will see. So first of all, I will tell you something quite familiar, I guess, but it's good to really remember before embarking upon the role of expectations, is that, first of all these developments that we are witnessing, they are collective. And so this is never something of a single firm or a single country. It's always something that depends on others. Second, actors have these uncertainties and the competition. So there is an urge to act while you do not know exactly what will happen. And that is valid for all in these developments. So researchers as well as engineers and governments. And that's another complicating factor, is you have to depend on what others do. So, and then maybe you don't know, but you have to guess what they will do, because what your choice will be, well, if it's successful, depends on whether others also take this route or take another route. So you have to make guesses in all kinds of ways. And this is where expectations start. And that's where the sociology of expectations finds an interesting point, in saying that expectations do all kinds of things in these conditions of uncertainty and competition, and the urge to act while you don't know what the future will be, but you have to do something. So I separate it in three quite obvious ways, maybe. So one is that if you have to decide something, you have to often to legitimate it. So there is always this accountability pressure, and that doesn't matter whether you are a researcher in a university, or if you are working in a ministry or in a firm, you have to defend your choices. For instance, when you need funding. So this is where researchers have to write proposals and they have to come up with something promising. The same holds within firms. You cannot just start within a laboratory anything you like. You have to get a project, and you have to get credibility for that. But also within government agencies, there is a pressure to not to miss and to really follow the nice thing. So you have to defend your choices by pointing to what is seen as promising. And then these promises, expectations, they legitimate and they protect the project. So even when it fails in the first instance, then still can continue. One of the interesting twists and perversities maybe is that these dynamics even work when nobody believes in, say, in a simple sense, the promise. If you feel that, well, I can start a project by just raising this expectation, everybody knows this is promising, and also those who have to judge those proposals, they also might think, well, yeah, but maybe good to just not to miss this and let's go on with it. So you may have situations when no one really believes the promise, but they still continue. I have experience with a recent project on data science where people feel, well, probably it's not the data that make the difference, but well, we are here in data science and there is a lot of money for it, so let's see how far we come. Okay, the second role is that under these conditions of uncertainty and competition, you have to decide what direction to take. You cannot just calculate. You have to, you have to find something that will give you a route that is properly and probably successful. In that sense, expectations have a function of heuristics in research and, well, and other rules of thumb. And what you also see a lot, and that is taking over the dynamics quite soon, is this idea that there are some things that you cannot miss. And so missing the boat is really the fear that fuels a lot of developments. And what I find interesting and intriguing, that often this fear of missing the boat creates the boat. So in a sense that without the fear of missing the boat, there would be no boat. And similar metaphors you hear is about the train cannot be stopped, it will happen anyhow. And so that is the guiding of search activities that expectations do. And then the third one is also intriguing, also in more sociological sense, is that expectations coordinate decisions. And expectations are interesting because they have a sort of insight, they have a story, and they tell something about what will happen in the future with protagonists and others who play a role. And what happens is that people then take a position in this sketched future and position themselves in the story as well as others. And this then is then leading up to all kinds of positioning of yourself and others. So mutual positioning leads to all kinds of agenda settings and divisions of tasks. I have one example here. Is it's already quite old, a question of coordination in the case of genome sequencing. And these are the pictures you will see in those sketches. And I'm sure you will see those pictures in your studies as well. In a sense, it's a sort of future impression but it's more. It's really this sort of promise that will play out. It's a story. And what happens is that actors then decide what in this story they will do. So if you are in your institute good at crafting databases, then you might think, well, yes, let's do the PDB database here, because in Japan they will be working on crystallography. They're good at that. And probably in Siemens, they will do more on structure and functioning and so on. So there are all kinds of activities that need each other for the future. And you can plot yourself in this. And of course, this has all kinds of reinforcing effects. If you read that they indeed in Japan will be doing the crystallography, then the urge to also find your place in this overall picture is increased. Okay. So what this then leads to, and this is the overall dynamics that you then see in case of expectations, and I find this a very nice sketch of how technology in general works, is that they're all, so if you then look from the left to the right, it starts with all kinds of possibilities that are seen or that somehow are becoming visible, and they can be picked up as a promise, and the promise has the insight. It has a story and script with roles and positions. If people take up that, then it will become part of the agenda, the things to do, the list of priorities, and that can be in a team, that can be in a firm, that can be in a government, and and these agendas then are saying what you should do. So this leads to requirements and the tasks. The interesting thing, though, is that the requirements that are derived from the agenda are exactly those of the promise. So if a new round of material is promising because it's 50% less, it's less corrosive, then the requirement is to make it 50% less corrosive, because that is then what is on the table to do. And at the same time, these expectations, these promises protect these activities to fulfill these requirements. So that's the niche. And the niche again leads to a second round of promises, more fine-grained promises, which also lead then to things to do. And if you have to think what to do, then the requirement, well, that is already given by the promise. So there's a sort of circular movement here through the future. And in the end, all kinds of new technologies emerge. They come out of this. But what I find interesting, that there is not a direct connection, all of these possibilities to new technology. There is this detour through the urgency of the future and the idea that you cannot afford to miss the boat, miss the train, and that you have to watch out what is promising and be very alert to that. This, of course, people think about these issues as the self-fulfilling prophecies, and this is the original statement made by Merton, famous sociologist, saying that the self-fulfilling prophecy is a false definition of the situation, but yet it evokes a new behavior which makes the original false conception come true. And his example was the rumor that the bank was in trouble, leading people to run to the counter, withdraw their money, which brings the bank into trouble. So the original false definition that the bank was in trouble becomes a true definition because people act on it. So it becomes self-fulfilling. And according to Merton, this is a perversity of social logic. It's something that you don't want because it's bringing something that is false into reality. In the case of technology, it's different because there is not a false definition. We cannot know for sure whether the promises are true or not. The only way to detect it is to well, to start with it and to try it. So it only matters whether you are willing to accept it and act accordingly or not. And so in a sense, there are some self-fulfilling prophecies there, but it's not the perversity. It's really something that is working, and it's, well, what is called the performativity of statements that is at stake here. So performative statements, they do things, but in technology, it's not perverse. It's something that is just part of the game. And so I think it's better just to stick to this idea of expectations as social facts. So not as statements just about the future that can be true or not, but they do things. And this is expressed in this famous quote of William Thomas and his wife, I should say. They say that if men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. So even if, for instance, what people think about immigration, if these fears are ludicrous, but somehow these fears have consequences. So in that sense, this basic idea of social facts really boils into this basic idea of constructivism. Okay, I can summarize it with this. Expectations have consequences. So the basic thing is that expectations are a particular kind of statements that do something. And this is, well, in philosophy of language, you have these this distinction between descriptive statements and normative statements, the is and the ought. And in the 1960s, the philosophers added the notion of performative statements that do things, they change the world. So the classic example is when you say in a wedding ceremony, yes, I do, then after that statement, you're married, which is a complete other situation. So the statement changed reality. And that is what expectations also do. They change reality. And how do they do that? Well, I singled out these three main lines of legitimation, guiding, and coordination. And if you look at the overall dynamics, then you can see that promises become requirements. And I've also listed this or theorized this as that people operate in prospective structures. In sociology, structures are mostly stemming from the past, what has been built up in the past, hierarchies, notions, cultural understandings, power structures. But these are from the past, whereas this is coming from the future. So you could say these are prospective structures, and people have to relate to it. And on a more philosophical note, I find it interesting to see that in contrast to the common understanding and the more instrumental idea of technology, technologies do not start with problems or needs. That's what we tend to think, but they start with promises. So it's not that first people decide this is missing or this should be repaired. No, if you look at how firms, how researchers, how institutes, how governments work, they follow what is promising. So that is, yeah, it gives maybe food for discussion, but I find this a very important consequence of this. Then something about these terms. So for me, expectations are the building blocks. And as I said, they are collective, they circulate, they are heterogeneous, so they can be statements indeed, so sentences that can be read or listened or heard. So, but they can also be images, pictures. I showed you a picture, or graphs. You might think of Moore's law. That's a very strong expectation in a graph. But also terms that are promising, like AI. I mean, that's the term is a promise in itself. But sometimes also just the artifacts, say the car of the future, or all kinds of shiny things that come to mind here. It's also good to note that they are ubiquitous, so they're everywhere. sometimes use this metaphor of the sea. So the sea of expectations, it's all around. Everything, every statement, every quote, every news item, there is so much of expectations in it. So referring to the future and what will happen and how to refer to that. Then the last point important to make here about expectations, that they are nested. So you have all kinds of specific expectations about, say, how a particular material will perform or what one firm will do, but there are also project expectations about a whole set of initiatives. And then we have even these encompassing umbrella terms like artificial intelligence or nanotechnology or genomics, and they have also their own workings. They have their spokespersons, they have their history, their work of care, and so they all exist in their own way, but they of course are nested. Then this second term of promises, and I'm not very sophisticated about this. I think, well, promises are just positive expectations, and then it's all the same. And expectations can, of course, also be negative. So promises are a subset. Visions, that's of course a term you hear a lot in sustainable transitions work, but that is then, I think, just packages of expectations that more or less coherently belong together and do all kinds of things. And then a broader set is maybe imaginary. So that can be defined as collectively available symbolic meanings and values. So freedom or speed, which is not just an expectation, but it's a sort of overarching value. And then you have the specific term of socio-technical imaginaries, became famous of the work of Sheila Yazanov and Kim. And they define it as collectively held, institutionally stabilized, and publicly performed visions of desirable futures. And so I think this is a specific form of expectations in which expectations have been stabilized into frames that are also founded and supported by all kinds of public policies. So it's a sort of a public policy version of visions. Okay, I'll continue to say a bit about some new developments the last years. What you see is all kinds of specific studies, sometimes in these really promising fields of hydrogen or nano or genomics, but sometimes also a bit beyond that. And also the longer development. So how come that we have these hopes for technology in general? And then you come to sociologists like Giddens and Beck on modernity and the way modern societies are constituted by all kinds of hopes on technology and innovation. So there is some work also, well, quite a lot of work on interventions and all kinds of forms of technology assessment and the LC and RRI activities. Not often so maybe recognizable as sociology of expectations, but there is a lot of future-oriented participation, future as resource for emancipation. And this, of course, links up with all kinds of policy interventions and policy studies, governance issues, and the idea that you have to open up developments and not just what is happening now, but also the future of the developments and include stakeholders. Then some work goes into this cross-fertilization. First of all, the classic sociology. I gave some examples of that, how the basic understandings of how reality is made up, well, that really you can see that through the lens of expectations, but also in terms of business studies, policy studies, and even in humanities, how these ideas that we tell stories to each other and that we live in stories is a strong approach there. also in therapy. So people have to live in sound stories. And if you do not live in a sound story, you have a problem, and that needs some help. The last point I would like to mention here is well, so what I find very interesting is this idea of development of needs. So what you often see is that with novel technology, it starts with a promise, and then it becomes a novelty, say a smartphone, and then suddenly it also becomes a need. So you see that, for instance, with internet, something really weird, interesting, promising, supported a lot, it came on the agenda, it became a requirement, and now it's a sort of human right to have internet. And so this idea that needs are shaped and that you follow technologies instead of that the technologies follow the need, that is, I find, very interesting and important also in thinking about, say, the climate crisis and the idea of transition. So what transitions tend to do is to take needs as a given, say mobility, and then try to find ways to make it more sustainable. But you could also ask, how come that this need of mobility is so well embedded? Okay, I'm almost coming to the end, and say a bit about sustainable transitions. I think there are two routes here to be distinguished. The first one is quite familiar, and I'm sure that you already have seen some of this. I would say this is the instrumental use of the sustainability of expectations, in which you are aware and acknowledge that expectations help to foster niches and bring about all kinds of novelties, and that they can even be helpful in challenging regimes. And in that sense, you can see and you can say that the sociology of expectations fills gaps of all kinds of existing theories of sustainable transitions. And well, just one example, the very famous picture, which is now a sort of entry ticket for many studies, has the Frank Geel's pattern of the multi-level dynamics. There you see that expectations are definitely there in the niche innovations on the basis of expectations. You see all kinds of small networks of actors, but also from the landscape through the regime, you can see all kinds of pressures. And so expectations are already part of all kinds of theories of sustainable transitions. But I think there is a second route as well, in which you could say that the sociology of expectations is a theory of its own, and that can be applied to sustainable transitions. And that's a theory that is based on a full constructivist view, based on that we live in a world of stories, imaginations, and that creates the world. So the world is not given, but is generated through stories, through statements, through expectations. And that relates to, well, the philosophical underpinnings are with the work of Austin on how to do things with words. So the performativity of language and the ideas of language of Wittgenstein, language games, and that creates realities, including transitions. So then you would focus on the speech acts. So saying things is doing things, but also the reverse is true, that when people do things, they also say things. So when the government gives funding to something, they also say, we believe in it. So you can also see the act of funding as a speech. So that's the idea of speech acts. You see that all around. You see the world as being constructed from speech acts, which leads to reactions in terms of mutual positioning. So if you say that, I can say this, and I can do that. So, and then sort of collective filling in all kinds of visions of what is desirable or what should be avoided. And what you then focus on is not so much what are the real conditions, but what really matters is the willingness to accept ideas about the future and to act accordingly. So that is the thing you focus on. And some of these ideas are indeed leading to specific takes on sustainability transition. So, for instance, these methods of futuring, as developed by Martin Heyer and colleagues, that is a good example of taking the sociology of expectations as an interesting starting point, as a novel take on sustainability transitions, and not just as an instrumental use. And of course, well, you're free to do, but I just want to sketch these possibilities and to give you this overview. And I think we have time now to discuss things, and I'm open for questions.